Right, there we are. Let's kick things off as it's now just gone 2 o'clock, 2:01 I make it. So we'll start today's presentation. Do excuse me if every now and again I take a slight pause as we let a few of the additional people in, just as people join a few moments later, which is fine. But let's get started. So on behalf of CYP, thank you for joining us today. My name's Dan. I'm Key Account Manager for the UK and Europe. With me is Kevin Cray, our Product Technical Development Director. And
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon indeed. And today we'll be running through HDBaseT as a format, and then also how a lot of our products integrate that technology. So let's start that now. So for anybody that doesn't know CYP, we've got a very large range of products which you can now see on screen. So covering things from AV over IP products. With that we have 1 gig and 10 gig solutions. We have matrices, which would cover HDMI and HDBaseT. We have extender products, which we'll cover quite a bit in depth today. Audio products, including audio converters, audio amplifiers. Presentation switches, video converters, such as scalers and such. Signal management products, HDMI cables, and these can be used across a multitude of applications, such as commercial, residential, medical, and industrial. Today we'll be mostly looking at, as I say, HDBaseT products, including HDBaseT extenders. We'll then touch on some examples of HDBaseT matrices. We'll be looking at some presentation switches with HDBaseT, also touching on audio products as we go through as well. And then we'll cover a couple of signal management products at the end, and then just a brief look at HDMI cabling. So many of you may know, and if you do, then excuse us, we might cover some very obvious parts for some, for others it might be brand new, but HDBaseT as a technology. So I will just read this part out, and then we'll carry on through from there. But essentially, HDBaseT has revolutionized the audio-visual market by offering more features, increased reach, and better performance than existing solutions. The cornerstone of the technology is the 5-play feature set, the converged delivery of uncompressed ultra high definition video and audio, Ethernet, control signals, USB 2, and up to 100 watts of power through a single LAN cable. So as you may know, if you've been in the game for a while now, typical installations in the past would have included a whole host of cables, including network cables, HDMI, separate audio, maybe digital audio and analog audio, power, control signals such as RS-232, and USB. And then of course HDBaseT came along, and all of that can now be done through the one cable, through a CAT cable. So what is the purpose of HDBaseT? Well, it's delivering, as we see on here, audio and video, control signals, Ethernet, LAN serving, power over the same cable, and with HDBaseT 2 technology, we've then got USB functionality. There are some other ways to introduce the USB into standard HDBaseT, HDBaseT 1.
We are looking at this at the moment. You can think of it as kind of like almost like if you overclock a processor. So obviously we've been working with HDBaseT, especially the HDBaseT 1 chip, for around 10 years now. And we're at the process now of just being able to get a little bit more bandwidth through the system by managing the speed of the HDBaseT chip, the valence chip within it. And we're working on trying to get USB inside an HDBaseT 1. So if you want simple sort of touch screen or interactive screens, we can try and do it with an HDBaseT 1 chip with a USB throughput that allows you to keep the cost down a little bit. Thinking really for the education sector that where costs can be prohibitive for certain systems like this. So it's something we're working on now, getting some samples actually in the next month. So hopefully through the second half of this year, you'll see some little systems coming out that are incorporating USB into standard HDBaseT, which is quite a cool feature.
Fantastic, thank you, Kev. Yeah, it's good to see there's still always development, even with an established technology like this. It's very good to see. So yeah, HDBaseT audiovisual is the ultimate choice for any scenario where you need a high throughput content over long distances. So let's look at cabling. Obviously, cabling in an HDBaseT installation is incredibly important. And some might ask, what cable should we use? So we're going to go through some of the different types of CAT cables now. So looking at Cat5, now realistically, we wouldn't recommend Cat5 for HDBaseT systems due to its limited bandwidth. If you did have Cat5 cabling in an installation already, then of course you could test the system, maybe with a point-to-point kit, and see if it can handle the requirements of HDBaseT. But if you were looking to install a new system, we wouldn't recommend Cat5 for an HDBaseT system.
Absolutely right.
Cat5e, for example, that would then be what we would class as the minimum standard. I say we, that's also the HDBaseT Alliance. We would then look at that as the minimum standard recommended for HDBaseT, as it does have slightly better bandwidth and slightly better active against interference, basically, slightly better insulation. As you go to Cat6, you then have better shielding again for reduced crosstalk and noise interference. And then Cat6a, which offers the same sort of insulation, but then gives you slightly higher bandwidth as well. So Cat6a, of course, then would be ideal, but as you can see from the other items on screen there, Cat5e would be the minimum recommendation that we would suggest.
You can kind of lump Cat7 into the same sort of category as Cat6a, really. It provides a similar type of thing. It has got a higher bandwidth. So Cat6a and Cat7 allow you to essentially get longer distances on the cable. So you'll notice that sometimes you see the distance being shorter for compatible 4K signals when you're looking at HDBaseT products. But if you actually go up to Cat6a or Cat7, you normally can maintain that maximum distance you get with 1080p at 3G 4K as well.
Fantastic, thank you, Kev. So looking here, you can see a bit of a comparison as well of three of those main cables, Cat5e, Cat6 and Cat6a. One of the key differences being there, you can see obviously the data speed, but also then the megahertz rating, so relating to the bandwidth. Kevin as well, sorry, you have said before, Cat5e cables do appear to be improving now and can have a higher bandwidth, but yeah, if you want to just quickly delve into that as well.
Yeah, no, it's over the years, Cat5e as standard, they've managed to increase the bandwidth, the megahertz rate. So it's quite common to find a Cat5e that goes up to 250 now, as well as a Cat6. So, you know, if your budget's tight and you are going to use Cat5e, then do have a look, because normally for literally a pence or two a meter, you can get something that's whilst it's not got the extra shielding of Cat6 and shielded cable, it at least gives you a little bit more megahertz, and it's very, very similar priced. It's only, as I say, a few pence per meter more.
Superb, thank you, Kev. So let's have a look at some key prefixes or key model numbers that you'll see from the CYP range of products, and that would be PU and PUV. And what do they mean? So actually, originally they stood for Puma, as it was products based over cat cable. Very clever play on words there, he says. So PU and PUV. The PU models are 24 volt based, and then the PUV models are 48 volt. And you'll break it down on here. So 24 volt models use power over cable, but they are only compatible with other PU products, obviously for the power rating. And that's the same then with the PUV models. They are only compatible with other 48 volt PUV products. That might include HDBaseT receivers and a matrix, for example. Of course, they have to be compatible. And speaking with Kev before, that's based on the original supply of HDBaseT. The recommendation was 48 volt, but it did start off quite an expensive technology. Was it the PoE injectors, did you say, Kev?
Yeah, it was, when HDBaseT came out, HDBaseT, the organisation, specified 48 volt. But PoE, 48 volt PoE injectors of the type that were needed with the relevant wattage were really horrendously expensive, because they weren't being manufactured in big numbers. So originally, I think every single HDBaseT manufacturer decided to go for 24 volt, so you're keeping the voltage as high as you can, because the price of the 48 volt PoE injectors was so expensive. Now, over the last 3 or 4 years especially, the 48 volt injectors, as they've been more and more commonly used with HDBaseT, the price has come down quite noticeably. So now the PoE injectors are only a little bit more for 48 volt than they are 24 volt. And the reality is the 48 volt, the higher the voltage you go, the more stability you get from the PoE or POH system. So, you know, it is nice to use 48 volt, although they are still a little bit more expensive than the 24 volt versions.
Superb, thank you, Kev. So this is what we're going to look through today. So we're going to look at HDBaseT extenders with up to 100 meters, or HDBaseT full 5-play, HDBaseT LITE, which is then a shorter distance, HDBaseT 2 technology, and then HDBaseT with adaptive visually lossless compression, AVLC. We'll cover that later on. So let's start with the full HDBaseT up to 100 meter models. So the key features here would be the convergence of up to 5 signals, wide selection of models from the range, and then up to that 100 meters transmission distance. We'll cover the maximum distances a little later as well. So what are we covering here with 5-play? We're covering uncompressed HD video, audio, 100 base T Ethernet or LAN serving, power over HDBaseT, POH, and then control signals up to a maximum of 100 meters through one CAT cable. Typical examples of that would be models like you see here. So on the left-hand side, you've got the PU507 TX and RX, a straightforward full HDBaseT point-to-point kit, HDMI in, HDBaseT up to 100 meters, and then HDMI out at the receiver end with IR back and forth. On the right-hand side, you've then got models like the PUV series, which, as we saw earlier, PUV means 48 volt. And then there's a wide range of these, including point-to-point, as you see on screen on the right, which would be the PUV 1510 TX and RX. And those are also available in wall plate versions. And there's a much wider range of PUV models, which we'll cover soon. On the bottom left there, you can see a straightforward HDBaseT distribution amplifier. Again, that's a PU series. So that would go with a model like you see here, the PU507. And that's a simple HDMI input and then 7 HDBaseT outputs. We'll look at these again a little bit further as we go into the presentation. Apologies 1 second while I just admit somebody into the presentation. There we go.
So all the distribution amplifiers have a local HDMI output. So the idea there is that it gives you another output, but also it provides you with an output to bridge to another distribution amplifier. So if, for example, you need to build a single digital signage over to 20 different displays, you can go into the first distribution amplifier and then just mirror out from the HDMI output into the next one, and you can build them up.
Fantastic. No, very good point. Very good point. So we're going to cover now our sort of flagship, I suppose, in a way, one of our newest systems, and one of the most unusual as well for our HDBaseT systems in terms of its flexibility. So this is the PUV 1600 series. You can see on the left-hand side there, there's already quite a few models that fit into this group. And so, as I say, a wide range, and you can mix and match these products as well. So you can pair up various transmitters with a selection of different receivers to custom build a system. The key thing to the 1600 series is that it has reverse power. So the power is going from the receiver back to the transmitter. In normal HDBaseT systems, it's the other way round. The transmitter has the power supply unit and sends power over cable to the receiver, whereas with this series here, this one sends it the other way, which I'll let Kevin cover in a second why we might do that. It's been designed really, although it can be used for a whole host of applications, key design here really was for places like huddle room, meeting rooms and huddle spaces, and you'll see why in a second when you see the flexibility and the functionality of the system. Again, as with a lot of our models in our ranges, there are wall plate versions available as well as normal sort of box variants. And we're regularly increasing this range. So we've just, for example, added a brand new model with an amplifier, which we'll cover again very shortly. But I'll move across now. Oh, in fact, sorry, there as well. Compatibility with selected presentation switches. So again, just increasing the range that you can build up, and again, flexibility in a system. So I'll let Kev delve into some of the PUV 1650 TX and RX.
Yeah, so this is the top of the range presentation system. So you've got a transmitter that has various inputs. So it's got HDMI, DisplayPort, and VGA, as well as a HDMI output for a local display. It is designed to go with the RX, but it can be used standalone. It has a trigger input, so you can use one of our CRTG1 triggers, and that's a desk mount unit, so very useful if you want to put the transmitter under a table in the meeting room. Obviously the power is coming back from the RX, so you only need to put a cat cable in there, and then you can run the trigger to the desk into a desk mount, and that enables you to control various elements of the system, of the 1650 kit, or even third-party equipment as well. So within the web GUI you can map the 8 buttons within the trigger, so it can control what input you're looking at, volumes and mutings, and even send telnet commands to other devices as well. So quite a clever little system there. Obviously you've then got some RS-232 if you need that, some IR, and of course your LAN serving. With your LAN serving on these 1600s, it's quite normal to put the LAN into the RX, and so the ports, the LAN port on the TX can be locally used. So you put the LAN into your RX, and then you have it available at the TX at the meeting room desk if someone wants to hardwire into the system. If you're giving a big presentation and there's lots of data and you don't want to use the Wi-Fi. So they covers resolutions up to 4K 6444, but obviously HDBaseT isn't actually capable of, doesn't have the bandwidth for sending 4K 6444. So all of the PUV 1600 range all has built-in automatic conversion. So what it's basically doing is when it sees a signal that is beyond the capabilities of standard HDBaseT, it will do some kind of conversion to it. Now, the user doesn't do anything. You don't have to do anything. So to give you a couple of examples of what's going on. So it might take the 4K 60 444 and it might drop it to 4K 60 420. So doing a chroma subsampling conversion. Or it might just do something simpler like a hertz rate conversion. So it might take 4K 60 and drop it to 4K 30. And in that way, you're guaranteed that whatever comes into the TXs will automatically be converted if it's above spec, and you will still get a picture at the other end, importantly. So the web GUI, there's lots of programming on the web GUI. You've obviously got the switching ability, and it has an auto switching mode, so it will automatically switch between inputs as you plug and unplug. You have simple things like you can put a banner up, so it allows you to have a little greeting you can put up if you want to. It has a collaboration section which allows you to control the other units of the TX and RX. It has events and event books if you want to program automation, timed automation events. It has macros, which are multiple commands that are multiple things that go off at the same time. So you add commands, you can add different commands that do different things, both to the unit and to third-party equipment that are connected either IR, RS-232, or Telnet, so you can control them as well. And then you can stack these commands into a macro. So if you wanted a macro that was basically powering the room on, you could do that type of thing. So the reverse power, as I said, so that's all of the PUV 1600 is reverse power. So all is power the RX, and the TX receives the power from the RX. So you only need the cat cable, HDBaseT cat cable into the TX to get your power. IR learning and retransmission. So as I say, you can actually capture IR signals. So if you've got something that you can only control via IR and you want to include that in this system, you can actually capture the IR code and then retransmit it either from the trigger input, or of course you can send telnet commands to the unit to trigger macros. So if you're using a third-party control system, there's a massive list of all the different command structures you can use, and you can integrate that into a third-party system as well. So with the RX, this is the one you power. So this has also got scaling in it. So if that's extra to the auto conversion that's built into the transmitter. So the scaling allows you to set a standard resolution for your system. So if you're using it with a WUXGA projector, you can select 1920 by 1200, and you can make sure that the output from the receiver up to your main screen is always exactly the correct resolution for that device. And you have the control that I've already mentioned, and then some audio de-embedding as well. You have a balanced audio de-embedder on a Phoenix connector, but if you don't have a balanced system, you can just wire it for unbalanced as well. Obviously, the unit has on-screen display and some push buttons as well. And also, you see there on the front of the unit, you have a couple of relays. These are simple contact close relays that allow you to do things like open some blinds, or have your projector screen come down, or your screen come up if you've got a screen riser. So you've got a couple of those that allow you to do that as well. You also have a local HDMI input. This is an additional input. Again, it can also switch around so that when everybody leaves the room, perhaps, you put a digital signage player in there, or something that you can fall back on as a source that can be displayed on the screen. So this local input is often used for those digital signage type sources, where you just have some digital signage of the company going through when there's no meetings going on in the room, or in an education environment, it might be the default PC with the website of the school or university in there. Commonly used there, and then there you can see the audio output. So again, you've got the plus and minus for left and right, and the ground if you want to be balanced, but you can just wire that as unbalanced as well. Great. I think you're muted, Dan.
Very good point, Kev. Very good point. The beauties of working from home as well when you're trying to juggle the mute button. There we go. Thank you very much, Kev, for running through that. So as you can see here, everyone, then just from a bit of an overview of the whole system. So as Kev mentioned, these models do have a variety of inputs, including DisplayPort, HDMI, VGA. The trigger actually as well, the trigger that Kevin described there, although it's a small image, you can see that on the left. A really simple 8-button trigger, and that plugs directly into the transmitter. As Kevin said as well, the transmitter then has that local HDMI output, which could either be fed on to a wider system if you want, or just used for a monitor. And then, of course, over LAN to the receiver end, and then you've got that local HDMI input, as Kev described, and then the variety of outputs, including things like the relay for use with projector lifts and screens, etc., etc. There's an example on the bottom there as well of one of our zone amplifiers. Although we're not going to cover amplifiers in depth today, we do have really, really small, only sort of about 15 centimeters squared, small amplifier for zones. Then we have slightly larger amplifiers, and then also some models with HDMI and HDBaseT. So again, there's quite a wide range of zone amplifiers available. If we look now as well, one of the latest models to the 1600 series is the 1630 TTX, seen on the bottom right-hand side here, which is a tabletop transmitter. So tabletop design, as we've said quite a few times now as well, because it's part of this same range, the power comes from the receiver. So if this were mounted on a desktop, you don't need separate power. You just run that CAT cable. So incredibly flexible for a meeting space. As you see there, power coming from the receiver to the transmitter. The unit has auto switching, just as the previous range did. So that will auto switch depending on what's been plugged in last, whether it's VGA or HDMI. And as Kev mentioned, the LAN serving. So if you've connected your local area network to the receiver, that will be sending LAN back to this transmitter. So at the desktop here, you've got that LAN would work as an output, and you could plug that straight into a laptop, for example, and the meeting room user then has access to the network. And this one as well. So again, even for a small desktop unit, this actually has the ability to send out commands. You can program through the web GUI key commands such as CEC or RS-232. So for example, if a customer or an end user walks into a meeting space, they could plug in their laptop to the HDMI input. You've then programmed that transmitter to send out a CEC command to a local screen. That would then send the CEC command to the receiver, and the receiver then sends that to your screen. And that's it, simple as that. You've plugged in a source, and it's then automatically turned on the meeting room screen for you.
Yeah, that's the key. That when you're programming it, and it happens on certain events. So it happens whenever you plug in a live source, it will automatically send these commands, and you can decide how long you want it to wait and things like that. So it's not that you have to do anything. Once you've set it up as the installer, it will automatically send them out. We've done quite a lot of testing on the CEC, and it seems to work very, very well with all the common brands that we see with the CEC enabled. And obviously, if you've got more exotic equipment or you have projectors, you can actually put RS-232 strings in as well. But remember, this is automated. So you come in, you plug in, it sends the automated CEC that turns the TV on and turns it to the right channel. And then during the meeting, if people are unplugging and unplugging, it will auto switch. And then when you leave the meeting, you can set a dwell time for maybe 30 seconds or a minute. And then after it doesn't see a live signal for that amount of time, it will again send another CEC or RS-232 string to your TV or your projector and ask it to turn off again. So completely automated once you've set up, and it's very easy to set it up.
Totally agree. As a very good example here, we actually use one of these in our AV Academy, in our UK AV Academy in Shepperton. And it is as simple as that. Walk in with your laptop, plug into the transmitter, and the meeting room's ready to run. So it's really, really simple. You'll see at the top end of that diagram as well, we've then got a 1620A RX. So it's a receiver, of course, 1620A. The A is indicating it's got an amplifier built in. So again, for a really simple meeting room solution, you can use the built-in amplifier just with, for example, a pair of wall-mounted speakers or ceiling speakers, and that's such a simple meeting room solution. The customer just sees the transmitter on the desk, everything else is then hidden behind the screen, but it's really, really simple to operate in that fashion. Also on this receiver, just like the previous model, you've got a local HDMI input. So behind this meeting room screen, for example, you might have a simple signage player with your company logo or the meeting room company logo or some very basic signage, whatever you want in there. That could be plugged into this local HDMI input that's with the screen already. And also this does have some relay outputs. So again, depending on which of our products you pair this up with, you could then utilize that for some third-party products, again, like projector lifts or maybe even blinds, just using simple relay control.
It's really hot. I need some aircon.
Same here. Britain's actually got nice weather for once.
Yeah, it's actually a disadvantage of working from home. I don't have air conditioning.
It's called Windows. Just open all your windows.
I've got the window open.
Right, now moving on. So that was full HDBaseT or HDBaseT with 5-play, as we said, so up to 100 meters, and there's a variety of models. We also have LITE models, which are designed realistically to offer a slightly lower price point, slightly shorter transmission distance, and another key feature which we'll cover in a second. So let's look at the details of LITE. So LITE versions available for shorter distances, convergence of 4 signals, and again, a variety of models. So if we have a look here, again, it's still combining full uncompressed HD video, audio, power over cable, and control signals. But the key thing we're missing compared to the full HDBaseT 5-play, there's no LAN serving. There's no Ethernet going over the cable. So if that is important for an installation, of course, you would go for HDBaseT full with 5-play. But if it's not required and that longer distance is not required, then of course you can go for some of the HDBaseT LITE options. And let's have a look through some of those. So again, standard point-to-point kits, just literally TX and RX with simple HDMI in and HDMI out at the RX. You've then got, again, distribution amplifiers. So this again is a 1 input, 7 HDBaseT output, and just as Kevin described earlier, there's a local HDMI output if you want to increase the system. You could daisy chain that out to another distribution amplifier, and then daisy chain that to another, etc., etc. And as mentioned before, these are PU products. So these are 24 volt. We then have the range of PUV products, which again are 48 volt. And again, there's a wide range of those that include, as you see, they're just standard point to point. And these are also compatible with some of our matrices, which we'll cover later.
Did we mention the extra earth security on PUV?
I don't think we did, Kev. Feel free to, though, of course.
No, it's just that as part of that design, that we've completely opto-isolated the earthing throughout it. So again, adds to the stability of the unit and adds to the longevity of the units as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kev. So again, just to have a look here, a quick comparison of full HDBaseT versus LITE. As we mentioned earlier, the distances are relating to what signal you're putting through the cable and what cabling you're running. So as you'll see at the top there, full HDBaseT with a 1080p signal over Cat5e or Cat6, you'd be looking at achieving that up to 100 meters distance. If you were putting a 4K signal through that, 4K 3G, then you'd be looking at more like 70 meters. And if you've gone for the Cat6A or Cat7, as Kev mentioned earlier on, you're then more likely to achieve that full 100 meter distance. Breaking that down again with HDBaseT LITE, if you've got a 1080p signal through Cat5e or Cat6, you'd be looking at achieving that up to maximum distance of 60 meters. But with a 4K signal, again, depending on the cabling, we give you either 35 or 40 meters. If I could just possibly ask, if anyone's accidentally off mute, we're getting a bit of interference on the audio. So if anyone would mind just muting, that would be much appreciated. Thank you very much, just for now. Let's quickly cover HDBaseT 2. So obviously, as it sounds, the models we were looking at before were HDBaseT 1. These are now HDBaseT 2. So the key features here of HDBaseT 2 technology would be error correction for increased stability over longer distance, and the option then of USB functionality. So we'll have a look at a key model in the CYP range, which is the PUV 2010. So as it says on here, you do get that signal error correction over the HDBaseT system, so you are getting increased stability over longer distance. Kev, do you want to explain that a little bit more in detail?
Sorry, yes, certainly. So it's using the error correction is the PAM system that was introduced by Valence on their HDBaseT 2 chip, which basically just means that you have a on-the-fly live error correction as the signal is passing through the HDBaseT chip. So it really does add to stability as well. When you couple this with using shielded cables, HDBaseT 2 is a lot more reliable in noisy cabling infrastructure systems. So whether you've got high EMI or whether you've got electrical interference because your Cat cable have had to run near to power cables. So this allows a lot of extra stability within the system. And if you haven't been able to control where the Cat cabling is in your system and you have a concern about it perhaps being perhaps it was laid by an electrician, for example. I don't know how many times I've heard that in the past. And obviously, electrician is laying some electrical cable, and if they're not directed to do otherwise, they may have laid your HDBaseT Cat cable right next to their electrical cable. So this is the point when you're in these type of dilemmas where you jump to HDBaseT 2 for that increased error correction and increased stability.
Superb. Thank you very much, Kev. So again, as you can see on screen there, then we do these models in a really slimline casing. So very, very good if you want to try and mount it somewhere discreetly, maybe again behind the back of a screen, for example. The HDBaseT,
those little wings can be removed. I don't think they come off, and you can put them on. So you can decide whether you want those wings on or not. It's up to you.
Super. Just for better flexibility, that's always a good thing. So again, these then have the ability for USB data serving. So if you are looking to use technologies such as either KVM, keyboard video mouse, or interactive displays, these would be a good option for you. Again, able to transmit that USB data from TX to RX. You might see on the unit as well there, you actually have the optical input, so you can use this for OAR, which is optical audio return, or these units actually support ARC. So if your screen supports ARC, you have the option of either using ARC through HDMI, or you can use the optical pathway. Again, that really depends on the system. I think some people may find that CEC, which is used with ARC, is not always 100%, whereas optical, that's why we put that on there. It's going to be a solid, reliable source if ARC is not a possible option. These do have LAN serving as well, so again, you can transmit the LAN signal from point to point. And as with many of our ranges, there are options for wall plate versions, so either standard box or wall plate versions. These are not the only models in the USB 2 range, but that's really covering the main benefits of possibly choosing HDBaseT 2 in a system. Let's have a look at AVLC, which is our adaptive visually lossless compression. So as Kevin mentioned earlier, there is a limit to what HDBaseT can transmit, which is 10.2 gigabits per second. If you wanted 4K HDR content, for example, that would be a higher bandwidth than 10.2 gigabits per second. So you then have to look at other options, and we've gone for adaptive visually lossless compression, which is basically allowing you to transmit almost visually lossless, as it says, image from point to point, still maintaining that HDR quality. Again, it converges the 5 signals we've discussed before, and we now have a variety of these models, including matrix units as well. So as I've just described, 10.2 gigabits per second is the bandwidth limitation of HDBaseT, but our technology just adds a very mild compression and essentially rebuilds that signal at the other end. And we've done side-by-side comparisons of these at ISE for the last few years, and probably 99% of people just have to take a pure guess as to which one is native content and which one is running through our AVLC technology, because the image quality is just that close. So 4K
and
UHD,
it maintains the proper HDR as well. You're not just getting the TV to flash up the HDR logo by passing some metadata across these systems. You really are getting the HDR. So if you've got a classic scene of a sky, you will get that really smooth blues and whites across the sky, or if it's the Martian, reds across the landscapes. Whereas when you're not having HDR, you'll get your standard banding on there. Be careful with what you're buying there, because a lot of manufacturers say they're HDR compatible with these systems, but actually all they're doing is passing the metadata and the brightness data across, but you're not actually getting the additional color depth and chroma subsampling. Whereas with this system, you really do. The other thing to note about our system is the adaptive bit. There is other manufacturers that have taken on the VLC technology, but not, as far as I'm aware, none of them have made it adaptive. So the adaptive section of it is really important, because if you don't have that adaptive section of it, what basically happens is it doesn't matter what you put in, whether it's within bandwidth or not within bandwidth, it will be compressed anyway. Whereas with the CYP adaptive visually lossless compression, the compression will only actually start, because we have chips in there that are measuring the bandwidth. It will only actually be told to engage when the bandwidth goes beyond the 10.2. So when you're using 1080p, even deep color 1080p, you won't get any of the compression kickoff, but as soon as you need it, it will automatically start.
fantastic, brilliant stuff. Thank you, Kev. So yeah, as you'll see here, the AVLC technology still has the 5-play elements in our HDBaseT full, but we then also have light versions available as well, which again, shorter distance, no LAN serving, and just obviously then offering a slightly reduced price point. This covers what we've just discussed really as well. So you've got the 3G solution, which is your HDBaseT regular, maximum 10.2 gigabits per second. And then you've got the 6G solution, which is the AVLC. So again, we're now offering essentially all of those, just to give more price point ranges, more specification ranges, and obviously then the highest image quality when the customer demands it. Options there, as I've said, you've got light models, which would be a maximum of 60 meters. With HDR, 4K HDR, for example, the light model is more likely to achieve around 35 meters. 60 meters is going to be with something of a slightly lower bandwidth.
Yeah,
You've then got
1080p basically.
1080p.
It's a good point there, really. When we talk about cable distances for the CAT cable and HDBaseT, we are referencing you sending a 1080p 60 hertz 444 8-bit signal. So, for example, for light versions, you might see other manufacturers that say up to 70 meters. And in fact, you know, we could say the same thing, but you're not going to get 1080p at 70 meters. So if you don't know that, you can be led down a wrong path. If you reduce that signal to 480p or 576p, then you might get the 70 meters or up to the 70 meters. But who in the modern age now is using such low resolutions as 480p and 576p? So we made the decision some years ago that we would always reference these cable distances where they're not specified, because sometimes we specify 4K and the distances for 4K, that we are talking about a 1080p 60 hertz signal, which is a really key thing to remember.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you, Kev. So again, you see here models like the PUV, so you can see on screen all of these are 48 volt models. The L in here actually indicates light. Most of our other models actually are PL, but just to throw everyone, we went with L on this one.
I don't know what happened there.
I don't know. Yeah,
I blame
someone else. Exactly.
Yeah,
Spot on, Kev. That's always the best option. Bottom left there, you can see the PUV 1810, which is then a full version. So again, maximum 100 meters with a 4K HDR signal. You'd be looking at realistically up to about 70 meters, I believe, sort of topping out with, again, suitable cabling. There are then slimline.
You can go to Cat6K, Cat7 and restore most of that distance if you use those higher grade Cat cablings.
Perfect. You've got the slimline versions, which are the 1830 and 1730, which, as well as being in the slimline casing, they have the optical audio return channel, OAR. So again, if you need to bring audio back from a receiver end back to a transmitter, these units have it. And on the bottom right there, you can see a 1 input, 4 output distribution amplifier, which we will cover next. So this is the 1H4HPL. So it's an HDBaseT LITE HDBaseT distribution amplifier, and again it supports our AVLC technology. So you'll see an image of the back of it here. Straight away you get the idea. HDMI input, HDMI output if you want to daisy chain to another of these units or just to monitor, and then 4 HDBaseT outputs. This is a LITE product, so again it will support 4K HDR up to around 35 meters. It has the separate audio de-embedding, which you can see on the back of the unit there. As I've already said, 4K HDR. And distributing full 18 gigabits per second. So a key example of this really would be somewhere like maybe a high-end retail outlet selling televisions, and they want to display 4K HDR content on all of those screens. This is going to be a nice way to do that with obviously efficiency. So you've got the one unit sending out to 4 separate screens. And there's just an overview of that as well in a system. Inputs onto the transmitter, send out your 4 CAT cables to 4 separate receivers, and there you are. You get IR as well on this, so if you need to send IR back from the zones, it will feed that back to the distribution amplifier as well. And once more, you can see examples of our separate zone amplifiers being used in this sort of scenario. Just because we are getting to about 45 minutes into it now, we're planning to give about 10 minutes at the end. So I'll run through just a bit of a summary of some other key products, and then we'll have a bit of time for some Q&A. So we've pretty much gone through most of these in the range, but I'll go through them quickly. PUV 1200 series are an HDBaseT LITE range. PUV 1500 series, which are then full HDBaseT with 5-play. And as you see this, the range starts to grow a little, and you get more advanced receivers and transmitters with things like, for example, audio de-embedding, scalers, that sort of thing. So again, that gives you a little bit more flexibility. PUV 1600 we've covered, which are the models with reverse power. Very, very good for things like meeting spaces, huddle spaces. And again, there's about 12 models in that range at the moment. So it is growing as we go. PUV 1700 you see there, which are the first models with AVLC for 4K HDR. And that's the LITE model. PUV 1800 we've just selected as well. That's full 5-play with 4K HDR support. HDBaseT 2, which gives you that flexibility of, as well as the error correction, you get the ability to start passing USB data for things like interactive displays and KVM. And then we've just launched as well the PUV 2100 series, which are a combination of many of these things: HDBaseT 2, AVLC, so they can handle 4K HDR, and these are the compatible models for our new Mod X modular matrix, which handles 16 by 16 input and output, and again supports AVLC for HDR content.
So those come in. The Mod X is a 4 input 4 output board, so you can have a 4x12, a 4x16, any combination of there. So it's in 4 rather than our old one that was based on an 8-frame system. This is based on a 4-frame system, so it does give you a little bit more flexibility.
Exactly right, and that's got either HDMI inputs, well, HDMI boards with 4 inputs, HDBaseT boards with 4 HDBaseT inputs, and then the matching outputs as well. So you can mix and match. Covering, again, this will be a bit of a whistle-stop tour, as we say, but then HDBaseT, the technology we've spoken about, can then be used in our matrices and also in selected presentation switches. So looking at HDBaseT matrices, you've got the likes of our incredibly popular 44XPL, which is a 4-input, 4-output HDBaseT matrix, 2 independent HDMI outputs, which can actually be mirrored to an HDBaseT output as well. So if you need it for going out to a separate audio amplifier like an AVR, you can actually, what's the word for it, Kev? Not sync, but you can link an output of HDMI to one of your HDBaseT outputs, can't you?
Oh yes, you can decide whether it's an independent, in other words, it's a completely independent, or you can mirror it to follow an HDBaseT output. Normally, that is where you have a zone that perhaps has a large screen in it, but it's been used for a cinema, and you want one of the HDMI outputs to mirror that zone to go into a local AVR that supports high definition audio systems, Dolby and DTS systems that are above what you can possibly do with without any other connection apart from HDMI.
Perfect, thank you very much. You can get an idea on the output of this one as well on the back. So you've then got some simple audio de-embedding, and as Kev said, it's 4 HDMI input, 2 HDMI out, which can be independent or linked, and then 4 HDBaseT outputs. Moving up from that, you've then got an HDBaseT full version. So being full, this one will then pass longer distances over the CAT cable. It has a slightly more advanced audio matrix as well. So this one, it's not just audio de-embedding. You can actually choose to route the audio separately. And again, because it's full HDBaseT, this model can then handle LAN serving. So if you need to get a LAN signal from the matrix to the endpoints, again, this will allow that because it's full HDBaseT. At the bottom there, sorry, I have just seen it says light version available. That's not actually true for this 4x4. But as we move on to the next model in the range, which is the 662, there are then models available in full HDBaseT and LITE. Again, this is a 6 HDMI input, 6 HDBaseT output, and it has those 2 HDMI outputs as well. So it can either be a 6x8, or as Kevin mentioned, it can be 6x6, and you can mirror the HDMI output. And this then has the full audio matrix, which we'll look at in a second. The 1082 is then a 10 input, 8 output. Again, it has those independent HDMI outputs. And when you look at the back of the 1082 matrix, you can really see there the flexibility. A whole host of zone audio outputs, separate zone audio inputs, which can be routed. And then you've also got things like digital inputs. And you can also send out, if you see on the right-hand side there, you've got some CAT outputs for audio. You can then send audio over CAT. So you can send long distance with the audio outputs as well.
Each one of those CAT, I think it's the PU304 kit that works with, the audio kit. Well, audio separates, TX and RX. And they're sending audio in both directions. It's a very useful kit, but it's quite useful for these matrices because you can run I think the cable can run up to about 300 meters for that. So if you're doing someone that's got like a pool room a couple of 100 meters from the house, you can actually run audio into that room and actually bring the audio back as well. Again, it's quite useful for DJ systems as well. If you want to run from in a bar or something, you want to take the DJ rig and pump it all the way where the amplifiers are, but also bring a local source, perhaps a streaming box or streaming service or something with Spotify on it that wants to come back the other way. You can actually go both ways across that cat. And with these matrices, the audio system is incredibly flexible. So it doesn't matter where the audio comes in, whether it's HDMI, the analog, the digital, or even over the cat, they can be routed anywhere. So they can be routed out of the zone outputs or the extended outputs there that you can see. Those are designed for audio only zones. So you might want, you know, just have speakers in your garden that you can mirror. So you can use this as a complete audio and video matrixing system. So I can take the audio in anywhere, I can put it out anywhere, including the HDMI outputs, including the HDBaseT outputs, as well as the obvious analog outputs as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kev. And let's have a look as well. You've then got models that have the AVLC technology. So these are then matrices that can handle 4K HDR. So again, we have a 4x4, 4 input, 4 output. This unit as well, 2 of the outputs on this 4x4 HDBaseT matrix, 2 of those HDBaseT outputs have automatic downscaling. So if the customer is combining 4K and 1080p screens in a property, you don't need to buy separate downscalers. This will automatically downscale on 2 of those zones if it needs to. You've then got a full 10 input, 8 output matrix, our sort of flagship there, which again has the AVLC technology. This has all the features Kev's just described as well, with the audio matrix, the independent HDMI outputs, but again, this one then supports the 4K HDR, thanks to our AVLC technology, and it has independent downscaling on every single HDBaseT output. So again, if you need to combine 4K screens and 1080p screens in a system, no need for separate downscalers. This is then the 4x2, which is a 421, which is designed originally for residential, but we're finding it incredibly popular in meeting spaces as well. It's a 4 HDMI input, 2 zone output unit, and it has a built-in stereo 20 watt amplifier. Again, automatic downscaling on the outputs. If we get a bit of a view of the back of it there, you'll see the 4 inputs, the HDMI output and the first HDBaseT output are mirrored. So these will always be showing the same signal, but you can obviously have then 2 screens running off that. And then zone B is your independent HDBaseT zone. And you'll see here you've then got the built-in amplifier with just stereo left and right outputs, and also a separate line output if you wanted to feed this into a slightly more advanced audio system. This actually has as well
the other zone.
Fair enough, Kev. Fantastic. Okay, super. And then you've also got the CYP control app for this. So CYP control app is of course free of charge and can control the matrix, but you can also, using IR learning, you can learn your source remote codes. So you can basically then use the CYP control app to control third-party sources like Blu-ray players, anything basically with IR. So the control app is incredibly simple to use, then allows you simple access to things like volume up and down, matrix input switching, but you can then use that for all your transport functions of satellite boxes, Blu-ray players, etc., etc. So an incredibly flexible unit, as I say, either sort of residentially or even in a small meeting space as well. Presentation switches, again, I do apologize, we've only got 5 minutes left, so I'll just run through these. There's a variety of presentation switches that we do with HDBaseT outputs to give you that distance, and that would include models like the 5400 on the left there, so HDMI, VGA, DisplayPort, separate analog input to go with your VGA, input control, HDMI out, HDBaseT out as well. So that's a really, really simple presentation switcher. You've then got slightly more advanced models with a wider array of inputs and outputs. So this model, for example, has the 8 inputs in total. And of that as well, you've then got input-wise, you've got 2 HDBaseT inputs. So if you need to feed in an external source, like another separate room, for example, you've got HDBaseT inputs, as well as having on the left, as you see there, you've got the HDBaseT output and HDMI. We then do our first HDBaseT presentation switcher with USB-C input for video, which is then the EL8500 VA. This has a built-in stereo 20-watt amplifier again, so flexibility in a lot of meeting spaces or even things like lectures as well. The USB-C input is then paired up with multiple other inputs as well. Again, HDBaseT inputs, HDMI inputs, VGA. It's compatible automatically with our trigger input, which we showed you earlier, just a very simple 8-button trigger. You've got the relay outputs that you can see on here as well, and then the usual control methods like over Telnet, RS232. And we'll break that down a bit more here as well, you'll see. So you can run this with various of our, as you see on screen here, these are PUV 1600 series. So these are the ones that take power from the receiver. So in this case, you've got, sorry, that's the wrong way around. This would be inputs into your unit. So the presentation switcher here is actually sending power out to your external transmitters. So these transmitters don't require separate power. At the same time as sending out power to your transmitters, this unit can also then send out power to your receiver. So again, you could pair that with one of our receivers, giving you again more flexibility in especially meeting room and huddle room spaces as well.
Right.
A brief look at test equipment. Anybody that's doing an installation, these are incredibly useful for either using as a pattern generator, using to analyze an incoming signal, or in the case of this portable battery powered unit, this can actually test HDMI cables to make sure that they're capable of passing 4K signal. Moving up from that, you do have a much more high end. We would realistically say this is more for sort of bench engineers and such like, but it could be used on site as well, of course. This has a wider range of outputs in terms of resolution, color spacing and such like. It has a wider range of testing as well. So if you want to put an input into this, you can then measure things like the EDID. You can export that using systems like Anapat, which is sort of a PC-based software. So again, more of a sort of engineer's tool. This has VGA as well as HDMI. So again, it's a little bit more advanced than the portable, but again, just a really good option for testing products.
The portable one is just, there's in my world, there's no excuse for a decent installation company to not have this or something similar. They're not expensive. They're battery powered. You can do so much with it on analyzing, pattern generation, and HDBaseT cabling. That really, as you can see, I've got one right here. That really, it would seem a really appropriate product to have in your arsenal to be able to check your installations and just be able to run things around your installations when you haven't maybe put the sources in yet or the screens in yet. You can still check the cabling infrastructure. You can still check these things. So I really do recommend these for the price they are. They're superb.
Indeed. Thank you, Kev. Superb. There we go. And if you do suffer, or if the customer suffers with things like bad power, which we do find as well regionally, so around Europe and other areas, there are some places where you can suffer with bad electrics, essentially, an unstable or unstable power supply. So things like this, the surge protector unit, go in line in the HDMI signal and can then obviously help to save a system. So again, that's something which we have. There's a whole host of other products as well in the sort of testing and signal management range. We just wanted to highlight a few today. And of course, then the thing that connects them all, CYP have a full range of premium certified HDMI cables up to 7 meters. We then have active optical cable as well, so AOC, fiber basically. This unit is incredibly discreet. I don't know whether you can get the scale from on screen there, but the HDMI head, given that it's converting the signal to optical, it is incredibly small, incredibly robust, and you might see there's actually no join in the metalwork. It is a cast head. It's incredibly solid and incredibly small. So for those tight installations, it's incredibly good, and that's 10 meter or 20 meter.
These are particularly stunning. If you can just see me there, I've got one here, and they are very, very small. The heads can go through very small ducting, and for many years we tried to find optical cabling that I would pass and we could sell, but I'm a fussy git, and I really didn't pass any. But these were the whole concept was designed with a new machine for molding the HDMI plugs, which is absolutely superb. And we've had lots of people using these, and very, very successfully. They're very, very good, very good cables. It's the only time I've ever called an HDMI cable sexy.
Very good point, Kev. Thank you very much. And then just rounding that off as well, then there's also the ultra slim cables, which go up to 1.8 meters. We have tested these. They will carry a 4K signal. That is absolutely fine. But to be sure, that's why we've gone for up to 1.8 meters. And then our premium certified cables go above that, and then AOC above that as well. So apologies for us running over time. That does bring us to the end. Do check out our website for more information and updates. We've also got our system solutions guide, which you can see on the right hand side of screen there. It's a whole host of example systems that we've put together and how you could resolve a system like that using a selection of CYP products. So it's really, really handy to give you some ideas on how you might resolve a system, how you might resolve a solution by using products such as the CYP range. And that does bring us to the end of the presentation. So thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. There are some questions in the chat.
I have been trying to answer them as we go through.
Oh, superb,
with the help of Stephen, who noticed I was accidentally just privately messaging him.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kev. In fact, I think you've cleared most of them down by the looks of it. So what I would say again, on behalf of CYP, thank you for joining us this afternoon and listening to the presentation. Again, that's really just sort of an overview of HDBaseT as a format, and that we do have a wide range of products including it, but the range is large as well. So if you have any other questions, feel free to either contact your local distributor or contact us directly, and obviously we'll be more than happy to help you out from there. So again, thank you very much everyone for your time.
Lovely to see you all. For those of you I know, good to see you all again. And for those of you I don't, I hope to see you in the future. Take care. Have a good rest of the afternoon or evening, depending where you are in the world.
Exactly.
Thanks very much.
Stay safe everyone. Thanks again for joining us.
Take care. Cheers now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.